Hi, this is Margaret Maloney, and welcome to the Death Dhamma podcast. Together we will consider life, death, and impermanence. Because in between birth and death, we lose things. Not just our glasses and our keys. We lose identities, relationships, ideas, and more. But what we can gain right now is facing this together, and we will gain freedom, peace, and progress on our path. Welcome back. It's time for another episode of the Death Dhamma podcast. This is your happy, cheerful host who talks about death, Margaret Maloney, and so glad that you are here. And even though we've been dealing with different kinds of impermanence this season, I thought today I would bring you these special thoughts on 9 simple ways to contemplate death. In the Abhaya Sutta, Anga Nikara 4.84, a Brahmin named Janisonian tells the Buddha that he believes that everyone who is subject to death is absolutely terrified of death. He doesn't believe that anyone can face death without fear. Now, the Buddha agrees that there are those who are afraid of death, and there are those who do not live in terror of death. Our goal, right? And when he teaches the difference between those who have conquered their fear of death and those who have not, spoiler alert, clinging, craving, unskillful actions, and doubting the teachings lead to fearful deaths. Abandoning clinging, living a life of good deeds, and trusting in the Dhamma are the way to a peaceful death. The Buddha teaches mindfulness of death in the Maranasati Sutta, Anga Nikara 6.19. And we're going to talk about that sutta next time, just so you know. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, he used charnel ground contemplation to remind monks that their bodies are subject to breakup and dissolution, and therefore clinging to the body is to be avoided. These are not light teachings, nor should they be. Getting to the point where you can mindfully acknowledge that death can arrive before you finish reading this sentence takes effort. But you know that it is worth it. To quote from Anga Nikara 7.46, the perception of death, when developed and pursued, is of great fruit, of great benefit. It gains a footing in the deathless, has the deathless as its final end. Thus was it said, and in reference to this was it said. If you are like me, some days a deep dive into the suttas is not within reach. Or you might benefit from other ways to become comfortable with death. It can be helpful to spend time understanding the beliefs that you hold personally about death and dying. What are you walking around with? And to notice the emotions that surface for you when you contemplate death. To help with this, here are 9 thoughts about death. You can use them as mantras, as an object for your meditation, or as a way to start thoughtful discussions with family and friends. I invite you to examine this list and to consider it and to add or subtract to it in a way that supports you in your own practice. But first, so our first thought, death is inescapable. I know, so now you're like, okay, Margaret, are they all going to be this obvious? I don't know. We'll see what you think. You know this intellectually. Do you know it part of your inner wisdom? Can you reflect upon this and remain undisturbed? 1 + 1 is 2. Everyone dies. 2 + 2 is 4. I will also die. Each of these phrases are facts, but even if you dislike math, the phrases everyone dies and I will also die are probably the phrases that made you feel uncomfortable just now if you experienced discomfort. Number 2, death can seem capricious. When your 100-year-old grandmother dies, you can easily make sense of it. But there is also the newborn baby or the new father who stepped into the wrong intersection. There will be death, and beyond knowing that all living creatures will die, it may defy logic or your sense of fairness. Stop expecting logic and fairness. Remember that each living being has his or her or their own karma. Number 3, death is normal. Breathing is a normal bodily function, and it is also normal to eventually stop breathing. This does not mean so that it's to be trivialized. Normal does not mean insignificant. The death of someone you love is impactful. And the good news is, since death is not unheard of, you live in a world where there are medical, financial, emotional, and spiritual support systems in place to guide you. Number 4, death is an integral part of life. Humans have many different milestones. Most of them are recognized and celebrated. In most cultures, we help children prepare to become adults. We help adults develop to raise children. Sometimes we help prepare one another to become elderly. But too often, we leave out the discussion and preparation for death, which is why so many people are surprised by death. Number 5, death is like a snowflake. No two are exactly alike. Every death is precious and unique. There is so much that we do not see. Most of the time, we see the exterior result. A heart stops beating. The breath becomes still. But every person has a unique final moment. Your ability to help someone experience peace during his or her last moment is invaluable. Number 6, life is precious, and so is death. Those who live with an acceptance of death die with fewer regrets. Death teaches us to stop wasting time. Death teaches us not to get caught up in petty squabbles. Number 7, death is not evil or bad. Consider this an invitation to practice equanimity. Starting with this short declaration, death is not evil or bad, is a big step. Number 8, there's more than one way to celebrate a life. I like to say that the Grim Reaper comes back and checks on us, which the Grim Reaper is a Western creation, right? And not in Buddhism, but I come from where I come, and so the Grim Reaper is still a big part of my thought process and how I help to think about and deal with death. So I like to say the Grim Reaper comes back. And when he does, he hates to see you and your family arguing over prayers, songs, and memorial services. Just be flexible and celebrate your loved ones in the best way possible. Which also brings us to number 9. Everyone grieves differently. Work on being non-judgmental. I have seen loving, crying, praying, laughing, and so much more. The best advice? Don't harm yourself or others. Be patient and practice self-compassion. Even those who prepare for death will experience grief. The goal is that by contemplating these ideas, you become less fearful and more comfortable. As you go through the list, pay attention to your reactions. What surfaces? Do you feel resistance, anger, fear, sadness, something else? What is going on in your body? You might even do some journaling, writing your responses to the statements that elicit your strongest feelings and capturing why some of the statements are easier for you to process. Each day you can work to develop and pursue your perception of death. Some days you're just not going to have the time and energy to enter a deep mindfulness of death practice. That's just how it is. When it's not possible, work with thoughts like the list provided here to continue growing and to make your death practice even more accessible. Because as I said, even though season 2 has been about different types of impermanence, it's still the Death Dhamma podcast. And I'm still with you, learning on my path to deal with impermanence and make friends with death, with the hope of having a peaceful life and a better rebirth. Thank you for being here.
You've been listening to the Death Dhamma podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, margaretmeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.